up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, while Seoul awaits Pyongyang's response to its proposal to arrange inter-Korean family reunions next month, North Korea urges South Korea to stop its firing exercises in waters near their border. In a move sure to further heighten tensions in Northeast Asia, Japan's new school textbook guidelines include claims to the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island and accusations Korea is illegally occupying the island. Plus, health authorities are worried about a spike in the number of people suffering from flu symptoms and pneumonia in Korea. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with the latest on Seoul's proposal to hold reunions for families separated since the Korean War. Amid seemingly thawing relations between the two Koreas, South Korea proposed on Monday to hold a fresh round of family reunions in the third week of February.
Seoul also suggested to meet for working-level talks Wednesday to fine-tune the details of the event. And for the latest, let's go live to our correspondent Hwang at the Unification Ministry. Hi, Sung-hee. Any response from the North yet?
No, not yet, Yusan. Although many are expecting an answer from North Korea sometime today, at least on Seoul's offer for the working-level talks, which may or may not take place tomorrow at the North Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom, depending on the North. Now, experts say that North Korea will come under heavy criticism if it turns down the offer once again, since it was the one to make the sudden proposal to resume family reunions last week. But there is also the possibility of the North making a counter-proposal on the date of the reunion. Now, the date that Seoul proposed is from February 17th to the 22nd, which is right before it begins its annual joint military drills with Washington. Experts say North Korea may ask to schedule the reunions during the military exercise period to pressure Seoul to cancel the military drills or to scale it down. Guys?
But we are certainly seeing a much more friendlier tone in communication between the two Koreas recently. We hear progress is being made in regards to the management of the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex.
That's right, Yusan. Seoul's Unification Ministry said that a number of South Korean workers entered Kaesong this morning using a new border cross-entry system for the joint factory park. Now, implementing the radio frequency identification system, also known as the RFID system, was one of the agreements reached between the two Koreas last year to facilitate the South Korean commute to and from the factory park. It also allows South Korean workers to travel in and out of Kaesong at any time on days that they are permitted to cross the border, instead of being allowed to cross the border during a designated time. The electronic system is on a 2-week test run, and if no problems are detected, it will be fully implemented after consultations with the North. Guys?
Okay, well, thank you very much for your report there, Sung-hee. That was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting on Seoul's proposal to hold family reunions next month and also on plans to modernize operations at the inter-Korean complex at Kaesong.
Well, Pyongyang has demanded that Seoul put a stop to a West Sea naval exercise scheduled for this afternoon. South Korea's defense ministry says Pyongyang called Seoul Monday through a military hotline on the western sea border to demand the naval exercise be stopped, threatening severe consequences if it continues as planned. The Defense Ministry responded by saying the drills are part of a regular exercise, stressing that the exercise should not affect a round of reunions for families separated since the Korean War, currently under discussion. The Japanese government has made fresh territorial claims to the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island. Tokyo's move to revise school textbooks and teaching manuals with the false claims deals yet another blow to the extremely sour ties between the two countries. Our Oh Jin-ju has the details.
How much worse can Korea-Japan relations get? The Japanese government has decided to define the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island and the disputed island chain in the East China Sea as its own territory in a manual on government guidelines for teachers and middle and high school textbooks. With regard to Dokdo, the manual includes a statement that Korea is, quote, illegally occupying Takeshima, which is what Japan calls the islets, and, quote, the Japanese government is protesting against such action. On the East China Sea islands, Tokyo says it is, quote, effectually controlling the island chain and there is no territorial disputes to resolve. Japanese Education Minister Hakubun Shimomura said it is natural for a country to properly teach its inherent territory. The manual contains government guidelines for teaching and has a major influence over the textbook screening process, as there is a regulation forcing all textbooks to follow the manual. Japan usually revises the guidelines and its manual every 10 years, and the next revision was supposed to take place in 2016. But Kyodo News reports that it is unprecedented for the Japanese government to make such changes earlier than scheduled. In 2008, the Japanese government had included a statement in its manual that, quote, there is a difference in opinion between Korea and Japan on the Dokdo Island, and that there needs to be efforts to strengthen their understanding on the territory. Even then, when Japan didn't say Dokdo was Japanese territory, the two nations' ties were under great strain. But now with Japan putting it in such strong words, it's hard to predict where Korea-Japan relations can go from here. Seoul's foreign ministry is expected to summon the Japanese ambassador to Korea later on this Tuesday to strongly protest Tokyo's move. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
With tensions in Northeast Asia rising over Japan's refusal to acknowledge its wartime atrocities, Germany, Poland, and other countries around the world held ceremonies to remember the victims of the Holocaust and ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Our Sun Jung-in has more.
Germany's parliament held its annual ceremony to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Monday, with government representatives and guests from other nations. The sound of a string quartet resonated inside the hall where the ceremony took place, while Holocaust survivors laid wreaths and flowers to honor the victims of the genocide. Monday's commemorations come 69 years after Soviet soldiers swept into Auschwitz, the former death camp in Poland, to liberate the roughly 7,000 people still interned there. German lawmakers expressed their sympathy for the survivors who are still suffering in the aftermath of the war.
Never should anyone be discriminated against or threatened by differences in political beliefs, religion, or gender. Germany no longer acknowledges prejudice against other ethnic groups.
Russian author and Holocaust survivor Daniel Granin, who was transported to Auschwitz in 1944 after a Nazi siege, was invited to describe his memories of the horrific experience.
It took me a long time to forgive Germany. That's how horrendous a war is. It's stained with blood.
Many people toured the Auschwitz compound, including officials from the Israeli parliament, who visited the site to remember its liberation by Russian soldiers in 1945. Germany has since apologized for the suffering inflicted by its troops and said they feel for the survivors who are still dealing with the consequences of war. Sun Jung-in, Arirang News.
Back here in Korea, quarantine officials appear to be fighting a losing battle as they attempt to contain the spread of the bird flu. More and more suspected cases are popping up in areas that were previously unaffected by the virus. Kwon So-wa has the latest.
Despite mass sterilizations on the ground and in the skies, the culling of ducks and chickens in their hundreds of thousands, and movement bans on livestock and farm workers, more and more suspected bird flu cases are being reported throughout Korea. Another suspected case was reported Tuesday at a chicken farm in the city of Pyeongtaek in Korea's central Gyeonggi-do province. If confirmed, this would be the first case of bird flu at a farm in Gyeonggi-do province and the second case of chicken contamination in the country. A day before, ducks on a farm in Jincheon in Chungcheongbuk-do province were also suspected of carrying the virus. Investigations in both Pyeongtaek and Jincheon are underway, and the results on whether the highly pathogenic H5N8 virus has affected the farms is expected in the next few days. While confirmed or suspected flu cases have hit Jeollado, Chungcheongdo, as well as Gyeonggi-do provinces so far, officials in Gyeongsangnam-do in the southeast of the country say migratory bird droppings have tested positive for a flu virus, but further tests need to be done. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said that in past bird flu epidemics, the virus has often broke out in the west coast regions and gradually spread inland. The government and the ruling Saenuri Party will hold an emergency meeting on this Tuesday to coordinate efforts to stem the spread of the virus over the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And while we're speaking about viruses, more and more people in Korea are falling ill with a severe bout of the flu. With young students heading back to school after the winter break, there are concerns the number of cases could skyrocket in the coming days. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Kim Seon-lang brought her 3-year-old son to the hospital after he showed no signs of improvement despite taking medication for over a week for what she thought was a common cold. Kim's son had a high fever reaching close to 40 degrees Celsius, coupled with severe coughing. The hospital confirmed he'd come down with pneumonia, a much more serious illness.
I was alarmed when the hospital said he had pneumonia.
Like Kim's son, the number of people showing symptoms of high fever, throat pains, and bodily fatigue are on the rise in Korea. Last week, around 30 people came down with a severe case of the flu, and a flu warning was issued last month over 3 strains, including the potentially deadly H1N1 virus.
What appears to be cold symptoms can lead to complications and turn into pneumonia and ear infections. There's also a condition called Reye's syndrome that could potentially harm the brain.
Local authorities say the number of cases is nothing to be worried about at the moment, but with children heading back to school after the winter break and millions of people planning to travel back to their hometowns for the Lunar New Year holidays, the number of cases could spike over the next few days and weeks. Experts say a patient suffering from a fever over 38 degrees Celsius should be taken to see a doctor, and the public should pay special attention to washing their hands thoroughly throughout the day. Meanwhile, health officials in the U.S. state of California say almost 150 people have died from the flu so far this month. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korean exporters lost their price competitiveness by nearly 5% last year because of the appreciation of the country's currency. The Bank of Korea says the won's effective exchange rate index stood at 108.64 in December, up 4.8% from a year earlier. The index, indicating the price competitiveness of Korean products in export markets, was the highest level in 5.5 years. It measures the won's relative strength against a trade-weighted basket of currencies of Korea's trade partners. The heavy sell-off in Korea and other emerging markets has sparked fresh concerns that we might be about to see a repeat of the massive currency sell-off that crippled Asian markets in the late 1990s. Our Yoo Ri-an has more.
Emerging markets, once fragile and small, fell like dominoes 15 years ago from the Asian financial crisis. Times have changed since then, but the massive sell-off seen in recent days indicates those countries are just as vulnerable as they were back in the late 1990s. From relatively sound economies like Mexico to politically rocky Turkey, investor jitters about the prospects for emerging economies are spreading fast. And the massive sell-off could speed up to an unprecedented level, as the money that flowed into emerging markets in recent years dwarfs the sums that fled some 15 years ago. Huge amounts of cheap cash from the U.S. Federal Reserve's massive stimulus program have flowed into emerging markets in recent years, hunting for higher returns. Now that the Fed is poised to further scale back its stimulus, that flow is rapidly reversing. But unlike last year, this year's sell-off is being exacerbated by local factors.
The Turkish situation has nothing to do with South Africa. You know, that has nothing to do with the Ukraine. That has nothing to do with the slowdown. Partially we're seeing in China, Thailand. But when you add them up, it looks like a crisis. Now, the problem with them being all very different is there's no single solution.
With concerns looming over a foreign exchange crisis in Argentina and the Turkish central bank's ability to keep interest rates low, emerging economies are bracing for even greater outflows in the coming days and weeks. Yurian, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. NEWSLINE at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Turning now to the latest developments in Ukraine, the country's beleaguered president Viktor Yanukovych has agreed to scrap anti-protest legislation that set off a wave of violent clashes between protesters and police over the past week. The repeal of that law was one of the opposition's main demands during talks Monday, but the president has shown no willingness to offer amnesty for arrested protesters unless protesters stop occupying buildings and end their mass demonstrations in central Kiev. Officials say the anti-protest law will likely be scrapped at a special parliament session on Tuesday. It's not immediately clear how the announcement was received by protesters in Kiev, but it's likely to be seen as a small victory over the government going into the crunch parliamentary session. Egypt's top military body has given Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi the green light to run for the presidency. Sisi, who also doubles up as defense minister, helped to oust the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, in July last year. He has yet to announce whether he will run, but the move by Egypt's Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is essentially seen as an endorsement of his candidacy. If his candidacy is confirmed, he is expected to win by a landslide, that is given his popularity and the lack of any serious rivals. Presidential elections are expected by the end of April. Peace talks aimed at bringing an end to the conflict in Syria are deadlocked, with the Syrian government and the opposition delegation unable to agree on a future role for President Bashar al-Assad. In Geneva Monday, the Syrian government team is reported to have laid out what it called a declaration of principles that did not mention any transfer of power. One of Assad's ministers told reporters that the president had no intention of, quote, giving up the keys to Damascus. Emerging from the meeting, the opposition delegation said the talks were not constructive and there had been no progress on humanitarian issues either. The talks continue on Tuesday.
With less than 5 months left before the World Cup in Brazil, protests against the tournament have flared across the nation, in some cases turning violent. FIFA has condemned the violence and is calling on Brazil to devise measures to ensure the safety of athletes, spectators, and Brazilian citizens. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
Mass protesters smashed shop windows in Sao Paulo while others set a passing car on fire. More than 2,000 people have taken to the streets since the weekend in major cities across Brazil to rally against the high cost of staging the World Cup. Waving flags and banners, the protesters shout, "There will be no cup." Violence broke out as police clashed with protesters who attacked cars and vandalized bikes. Police used tear gas guns to disperse the crowds and detained more than 100 demonstrators, while one protester was shot. The protesters are against the huge amount of money being spent on new stadiums and say the money should be used for public services.
It costs too much money. The money should be used to invest in better health and education services. We need to spend the money to improve the lives of the citizens.
The protest was planned by activist group Anonymous, which has been holding rallies across the nation since the Confederations Cup last June. Back then, about 1 million people took to the streets in cities across Brazil to speak out against government corruption and poor public services, while the nation spends billions on the World Cup. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff convened an emergency cabinet meeting to come up with countermeasures. FIFA says it respects people's right to protest peacefully, but has condemned the violence and called on the Brazilian government to take steps to ensure the safety of players and the spectators. The World Football's governing body has already warned Brazil to speed up its preparations for the tournament. The World Cup will kick off in Sao Paulo on June 12th. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Apple has announced profits of slightly over $13 billion for the most recent quarter, but this wasn't enough to stop the company's shares tumbling 6% in after-hours trading after iPhone sales fell short of analysts' expectations. Apple's revenues rose to $57.6 billion in the quarter, which covers the October to January period. Over those 3 months, the tech giant sold a record 51 million iPhones, missing analyst estimates of 54.7 million. Apple also sold a record 26 million iPads, 6 million iPods, and 4.8 million Macs over the 3-month period. The Korea Grand Sale is in full swing, with more than 27,000 stores taking part across the country. The annual shopping festival is aimed at promoting the nation's retail industry to tourists through special deals and events. Our Paul Lee has more.
Here in the Myeongdong shopping district in the heart of Seoul, customers from around the world crowd into local shops and stores. The 2014 Korea Grand Sale kicked off earlier this month at major tourist areas in cities across the country, including Seoul, Busan, Gwangju, and Jeju. The shopping extravaganza is marketed towards foreigners by offering exclusive sales discounts and benefits at department stores, restaurants, hotel accommodations, as well as other local companies. Nearly 120 companies across more than 27,000 venues nationwide have signed up to take part this year, including popular tourist attractions and even traditional Korean markets. It's an important time for the retail industry as it prepares to welcome a wave of Chinese tourists who have emerged as the largest group of international travelers to Korea. The Spring Festival, China's biggest national holiday, will begin at the end of this month and run through February 6, in celebration of the Lunar New Year. Businesses have already decorated their shops in bright red and put up translated signs with prices featuring the number 8, both which are favored by Chinese customers. Improving conveniences for foreign shoppers is also a focus this year. Additional translators and tour guides will be deployed to help foreigners, while free Wi-Fi hotspots will be offered to help connect them to online resources in 5 languages. The Korea Grand Sale will run through February 16th, offering visitors and foreign residents special weekly deals and cultural performances. Looking ahead, the Visit Korea Committee says they plan to continue developing the sale into one of Asia's most popular shopping events. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
And time now to get an update on the weather with our Lee Ji-yeon at the Weather Center. Hello there, Ji-yeon.
Good afternoon, Mark and News. And well, guys, about 27 million people are expected to travel back to their hometowns for the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday.
Yeah, and that's more than half the population of Korea. So really, everyone's on the move pretty much. And the traffic is horrendous. And it really is a long drive, no matter how far you're going.
Well, that's right, Mark. So make sure your vehicle has had a tune-up before you set out on the road. And we're also expecting frequent rain showers across the nation during the holiday, which could make the journey a bit more stressful. But at least the weather will be mild throughout the holiday weekend. Now, today should be the coolest day of the week for the central region. That's 2 to 3 degrees lower than yesterday, but it's still 2 to 3 degrees higher than the seasonal average. Now, it was cloudy this morning, but the sun is out this afternoon, so it will be a good idea to go out and enjoy some nice winter sunshine this afternoon. And tomorrow, we'll wake up to temperatures that are below zero, but temperatures should be 2 to 4 degrees higher than today with a fair amount of sunshine. So if you're planning to travel tomorrow afternoon, the weather shouldn't be a problem. And as I said earlier, we have a few showers in store on Thursday in most regions, but they should all let up before noon and temperatures should rise as the day goes on. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The temperature in Seoul will get up to 3 this afternoon. Daegu and Gwangju will see a high of 11 and 10 respectively, while Busan will top out at 12. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju will climb up to 11 in the afternoon. Daejeon will get up to 8, while the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be at -2. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world.
Okay, well, thank you to Jion for the weather there, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again tomorrow at noon here in Seoul.